When Lily found the doll, she was sitting on a park bench, alone with empty glassy eyes, her arms folded neatly, as if she had been left there on purpose. The girl looked around, but there were no children or parents around. It seemed strange, but Lily was only 8, and she didn't see anything disturbing about it. She just thought someone had forgotten a toy. The doll looked unusual, an overly detailed face, almost lifelike hair, and thin porcelain fingers folded in a waiting pose. Lily liked the find immediately and hurried to take it with her. Kate, her mother, didn't approve of the find, but she didn't argue with her daughter. In the back of her mind, there was something unnatural about the doll. The look, the delicate, overly correct features, as if the toy hadn't been made for play, but for something else. But Lily kept it with her, taking it with her everywhere, putting it next to her when she fell asleep. As the days went by, Kate tried to ignore it until she began to notice strange things. Several times she found the doll in the wrong place, not where her daughter had left it. Lily would put it to bed, but in the morning it would be in the middle of the room, sitting right on the floor, as if someone had moved it. One time Kate put the doll on a shelf, but a few minutes later she saw it on the bed again. She figured Lily was just playing and didn't remember it. Then the girl started talking to her. Just a normal child's imagination, Kate told herself. But one day Lily said the doll was talking back to her. Kate wrote it off as fantasy, but her anxiety grew. At times she thought she saw movement. It was like a shadow, an edge of vision, but when she looked straight ahead, it was the same as before. It was silly, ridiculous, but it still made her heart clench with anxious foreboding. It all ended that night when Kate woke up to the sound of footsteps. She thought it was Lily at first, but the footsteps were too light, as if her bare feet were gently touching the carpet, trying not to make too much noise. She lay there, trying not to move, listening as the sound approached her bedroom. The silence was deafening, dragging, and it only made it worse. Slowly, very slowly, she turned her head. There was a doll sitting in the doorway, right on the floor. Kate froze, her heart pounding frantically in her chest. She couldn't understand how she had gotten here. At that moment, Lily appeared in the hallway. She stood as if not fully awake, her gaze blank and lifeless. She said that this had happened before. Lily spoke quietly, slowly, as if she was struggling to say the words. "Who?" The girl held her gaze on the doll for a moment, then said, "The one before me." Kate felt a cold dread spill inside her. Lily stood still, but her body seemed unnatural, as if something else was controlling her. Kate couldn't take it anymore. She scrambled off the bed, grabbed her daughter's hand, yanked her sharply toward her, and pulled her against her chest. Her heart was pounding and her hands were shaking. She couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed the doll, took it out into the yard, and threw it in the trash. Back in the house, she stared at the door for a long time, trying to convince herself that it was all over now. But in the night, she was awakened again by whispering. At first, she thought it was just the wind. Then she heard the soft sound of footsteps, barely audible, as if someone had walked down the hallway. She held her breath. The footsteps came closer. She sensed she was not alone. Slowly, very slowly, she turned her head toward the door. The doll was sitting right at the threshold of the bedroom. Lily stood beside it, her eyes alien, as if she was looking out of place. "Mom!" Her voice was muffled, barely audible. She said she needed a body. Kate couldn't speak. The doll said, "It's your turn now." Kate's heart was pounding frantically. She grabbed her daughter and rushed toward the stairs. Running into Lily's room, she tore off the blanket and covered the doll with it, turning her gaze away sharply. She couldn't see her anymore. She didn't want to see her. The next morning she burned it. But as the fabric blackened and the porcelain skin cracked under the flames, Kate could have sworn she heard a soft, thin voice. "You'll still find a new one." 3 days passed. The house was finally quiet. Kate could almost believe it was over, almost believed they were rid of her. But when she came home from work one evening, Lily was sitting on the bed. In front of her, on her lap, lay a new doll. Porcelain skin, a blank stare, perfect facial features. Lily slowly raised her head. She said, "You need a body too." Kate couldn't get a word out. The doll sat next to Lily, but now it had Kate's face. I got tired of the hustle and bustle of the city and decided to take a small cabin in the middle of nowhere, just for a couple weeks, just to be alone, no calls, no people. This house promised me peace and quiet. It was built of old, solid logs, and there was a massive fireplace in the center of the living room. There was a dense forest stretching beyond the horizon. It seemed to me that here I could find peace. The first night I sat by the fire for a long time, watching the flames devour the dry logs. Their crackling filled the room with coziness, and warmth spread through my body, soothing my mind. There were no thoughts in my head, only the flickering of the fire and the light hum of the wind outside the window. The second night everything changed. I relit the fireplace, immersing myself in its dance of light. At one point I heard a sound that seemed strange. At first I thought it was just the normal crackling of wood, but then I caught something else in it. A whisper. It was faint, almost indistinguishable, as if someone was standing behind the wall, speaking too softly to make out the words. I froze, listening. A muffled, quiet voice, as if someone were speaking from inside the flames. I shuddered. Maybe it was just the wind playing in the chimney, or was it fatigue? I tried to ignore it. But the longer I stared into the flames, the more distinct the sounds became. It wasn't just noise. Someone was whispering something to me. I drew back, forcing myself not to panic. The room was suddenly chilly, though the fire in the fireplace burned steady, blazing with golden tongues. I turned off the lights, leaving only the fire. The voice was clearer now. It was calling to me. "Can you hear us?" I shuddered, rising sharply to my feet. The cold crept into my bones, my fingers trembling. Who is this? How do they know me? My breathing hitched. I stared at the fireplace, trying to find a rational explanation for what was happening, but the fire looked too ordinary. I told myself I was tired, that it was just my imagination. I should just go to bed. But before I left the living room, I heard another whisper. It sounded right behind me. "We know you." The night passed in agonizing reflection. Every rustle in the house made me listen, tense. I caught myself thinking I was afraid to look toward the fireplace. It seemed alive in the darkness, as if something inside it had a life of its own. I wondered if it wasn't a figment of my imagination. On the third night, I decided that I would not light the fire. Let the house stay cold. Let it be a long night, just so I wouldn't hear that voice again. But after a few hours, I couldn't stand it. The frost crept under my clothes, making me shiver. I threw logs into the fireplace, setting them on fire. As soon as the flames flared up, it spoke. But now the voice wasn't just coming from the fireplace. I froze. The whisper was spreading throughout the room. It came from the walls, from the floor, from the very darkness around me. It was no longer faint. Now it was insistent, calling. "We're here." Something clenched in my chest. I looked around, but I was alone. Or was I not? I stood up, my legs wobbling. My hand reached for the door, the instinctive urge to run binding my body. But before I could reach the handle, I noticed something in the fire. There were shadows moving in the depths of the flames. At first they were indistinguishable, but with each passing second they took shape. They were faces, human, agonized, twisted in a silent scream. I grabbed a bucket of water and splashed it into the fireplace. The fire didn't go out. On the contrary, it rose higher, flames reaching for the ceiling like greedy hands trying to grab me. I saw them again, faces frozen in despair and horror. I jerked backward, stumbling. At the same instant, there was a heavy knock on the door. I froze. My breath came in short gasps. I wasn't expecting anyone. This house was in the middle of nowhere. No one would know I was here. The knock came again, louder. Heavy footsteps echoed outside. I held my breath and looked out the window. Deep in the woods between the trees stood a figure. She was almost indistinguishable, but I could feel her gaze. I couldn't see the eyes, but I knew she was looking right at me. A cold terror flared up in my chest. The fire in the fireplace was suddenly gone. Not out, gone, as if it had never been there. Only smoldering embers smoked in the ash. I turned my head, my heart racing. Something in the room had changed. I couldn't tell what it was, but I knew I wasn't alone. I didn't sleep a wink until morning. When the sun lit up the house, I thought the night was just a mind game. But when I stepped out onto the porch, a chill ran down my spine. There were barefoot footprints in the ash of the fireplace, and they led into the woods. I glanced at the door, determined to leave immediately. But before I could make a move, I heard another whisper, this time right behind me. I never believed in mysticism. Logic always outweighed superstition, and I attributed all oddities to chance. But one night I received a call that turned everything I believed in upside down. It happened at 2:17 in the morning. I woke up to the sharp sound of the phone. Squinting sleepily, I reached over to the nightstand and looked at the screen. There was a chill in my chest. It was myself calling. My own name was written on the display. The same number. The same contact I'd never put in my phone book. It must be a mistake, I thought, or someone's prank. But the longer the phone continued to vibrate, the more the fear inside me clenched. It seemed to me that this wasn't just a fluke, but something more. It was as if the very space around me had shrunk, forcing me to pick up the phone. I looked at the call timer. 02:17 a.m. It hadn't reset. Usually, if no one answers, the call stops after a few seconds, but this one kept going. It was like the caller was waiting for me to answer. I took in a lungful of air, and without realizing what I was doing, swiped my finger across the screen, accepting the call. Hello? My voice shook. A second of silence. Then I heard myself. But it wasn't really me. The voice sounded muffled, like a whisper through a thin wall. Don't leave the house. It wasn't you. My heart thudded in my chest. I heard my own voice, but it was somehow alien. It was like I was speaking in a panic, squeezed with a sense of inevitability. It was as if whoever was speaking knew something terrible was about to happen. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, but before I could ask anything, the line cut off. A complete, absolute signal of silence. I froze. Looked around the room as if expecting to see something strange, but everything was in place. Maybe it was just a dream, or a system malfunction. I decided to call back. It rang. 1, 2, 3. There was breathing in the receiver. My own. It was slow, tense, as if someone had just run a marathon. In that moment I realized it wasn't my own breathing. It existed separately. Before I could speak, I heard a sound. A thud. 3 knocks on the door. Instantly, my body went cold. I turned around slowly. My apartment door was closed, but behind it, someone was standing behind it. I knew this with frightening certainty. He was listening to me. I froze, hesitant to move. It was as if time had frozen. The phone in my hand vibrated again. Another call. My number again. The screen read, "Incoming call. You." My throat went dry. I tried to swallow, but I couldn't. The door remained still, but I felt a presence. It wouldn't go away. It felt like the walls of my apartment were suddenly thinner, like something could break through them. The ringing on the phone was too loud. It sounded like it was coming from right inside my ears. I pressed answer. "Are you still there?" I said, not recognizing my own voice. "They're already inside." The phone slipped out of my hands, hit the floor, and the screen went blank. My heart was pounding frantically. The room seemed unnaturally quiet, as if someone had taken all the sounds out of it. Then I heard a whisper behind me. I turned my head slowly, feeling the icy fear paralyzing every cell in my body. In the mirror that hung across the room, my reflection didn't move with me. It was looking directly at me and smiling. I jerked back in a panic and lunged backward, but I tripped and hit the nightstand. The lamp fell, shattering. The light flickered, casting distorted shadows on the walls. The reflection in the mirror still stood still, but I saw it slowly raise its hand, though I didn't do it myself. The knock on the door repeated, harder, louder. It wasn't 3 knocks now, it was insistent. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to collect my thoughts, but when I opened my eyes, the mirror was empty. My reflection was no longer there. The doorknob began to turn. I backed up, hitting my back against the wall. The phone vibrated on the floor again. My number. I didn't want to pick it up, but my fingers reached for the screen. "You let him in." I clutched the phone in my hand. The voice in the receiver was muffled, as if it sounded far away, but there was something of mine in it. Footsteps. They were already behind me. I felt icy breath at my ear, and before I could scream, the lights went out. Everything went dark. The room vanished, dissolved into the sound of my racing heart. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could hear was breathing. It was too close. Something moved in the darkness. A low, hoarse whisper cut through the silence. "You are me now." I couldn't feel my body, only the unnatural silence around me, as if the world itself was holding its breath. At the last moment, I realized that my eyes were open, but I couldn't see. The darkness didn't disappear. I was no longer myself. And then the phone rang again. The screen that should have been shattered was glowing in the darkness. A single word burned on it. "Incoming call. You." The 5 of them went camping: Alex, Dan, Mark, Josh, and Sam. Every year they chose a new route away from people, closer to the wilderness. The deeper into the woods, the better. This time they made it to a remote section of the national park where hardly any humans had ever set foot. It was exactly what they were looking for: silence, isolation, a real break from civilization. The day passed quietly. They set up camp, lit a fire, joked with each other, discussing who would be the first to get tired and whine. Talking about strange disappearances in the forests was just entertainment, something that sounded interesting by the flames, but wasn't taken seriously. They joked around, ate roasted marshmallows, and enjoyed the chill of the night. But the first night, something went wrong. Alex woke up with a strange feeling, as if something had changed. The darkness seemed thicker, the air heavier, and the forest too quiet. He turned on his eyes shut. His body told him one thing: don't answer it. The next morning, Mark was gone. His sleeping bag was still zipped up, his belongings still in place. Not a single mark on the ground, no sign of struggle. He seemed to have simply disappeared. In panic, they searched the camp, shouting, but there was only silence in response. The forest was vast, but not endless. He couldn't have gotten this far. He couldn't just disappear. By evening, they called for rescue. During the night, Alex couldn't sleep. He lay in the tent, listening to every rustle. The muffled anxiety in his chest did not subside, and at 3 in the morning he heard it again. A quiet, lingering voice calling to him. But now it wasn't just Mark. "Dan, I'm cold." The voice came from behind the tent. Dan was asleep beside him. The voice came again, more insistent, closer. Alex froze. His hand reached for the tent zipper, but he stopped. "If you open it." The tent shook. Someone ran their fingers through the fabric, and then footsteps again. Calm, unhurried. Alex couldn't stand it, ripped the zipper, looked outside. Emptiness. The wind rustled the leaves quietly. Everything looked the same, but inside something told him that something was here. In the morning it was the 4 of them again. It got worse during the night. Josh woke up to a touch. It was like someone was running cold fingers over his cheek. He froze, out of breath. A whisper slipped right by his ear. "Josh, help me." He recognized the voice. Dan. But Dan was sleeping a meter away from him. He turned his head sharply, but there was no one nearby. There was a quiet rustle behind the tent fabric, as if something was slowly receding, and then footsteps in the woods, diminutive, retreating into the darkness. And with each step, the voice grew quieter. The next morning, Josh was gone. Sam couldn't take it anymore. He tried to reason logically, but his hands were shaking. He said it was a prank, that they were trying to scare him, but his eyes betrayed his fear. At night, Alex and Sam stayed alone in the same tent. They zipped up the inside. They left their flashlights on. They weren't going to fall asleep. At 3 a.m., the voices came back, but now there were two. Sam, Alex, help, Mark and Dan. Their voices were getting closer. The fabric of the tent bulged slightly, as if someone was leaning in from outside. Inside, bodies tensed. No one moved. The voices began repeating their words, whispered, hoarse, almost playful. Sam, I'm scared. Alex, I want to go home. The words were too precise, too right, as if they weren't spoken, but mimicked. The footsteps stopped. The fabric of the tent shook. And then, silence. In the morning, they ran out of the woods without looking back. The rescuers found nothing. No footprints, no voices, no disappearances. But years later, when Alex was hiking again, far from that place in a completely different forest, that voice called him again. It called his name again. This time the voice was his own.